Why don't we go ahead and get started? We are only missing one person on the committee, and that is Regent Russell Cox, and hopefully he'll join us here soon. So I want to thank everyone for attending. We have a fairly large group today. Oh, there's Russell. Somebody let him in?
Yeah, I just let him in.
Great. Awesome. Okay, good. All right, we have a fairly large group today, and that's exciting because there's quite a bit of information for us to cover. We are going to go through some of the housekeeping activities that we typically do at the beginning of the agenda. There will be some discussion, brief overview from our external auditors, formerly known as BKD. I think they have a new name as of today. So I will let them talk about that. And then we will discuss the audit committee charter that had been sent to all of you at least about a week and a half, if not more, ago. I am going to be calling for some action on that from this committee today. Hopefully we'll be comfortable moving it forward to the Board of Regents for next week. And then we will receive an update from our internal auditor, Mr. Lance Mann of Dean Dorton. With that, I would like to call to order the KCTCS Audit Committee meeting. It is June 1st, and the time is 3:33 p.m. And I would ask our parliamentarian, the Honorable Pam Duncan, to please call the roll.
Mr. Jeff Holliday.
Yes, present.
Ms. Jenna Scope.
Present.
Chair Damaris.
Here.
Regent Cox.
Here.
Regent Green.
Here.
We have a quorum. Advisory members are present and all voting members are present.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. First order of business is approval of the March 15th, 2022 meeting minutes. And I'm going to ask if there are any corrections to those minutes. Hearing none, I believe we do not have to do a roll call, so those minutes are approved. Is that correct, Pam?
That's correct.
Great.
Correct.
Awesome. All right, first order of business is introduction of our external auditors. And they are on the line here. And they do have a little walkthrough presentation that was sent to Hannah. So she's going to have that on your screen for you to take a look at. And so go ahead. I was going to call you BKD. I think you're a different name now. So just, yeah, Mary and Jennifer, go ahead and let us know what's going on. Please introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background, and then go through the engagement overview.
Will do. Thanks, Chair Damaris. I appreciate that. So yes, the big news, this is probably our first presentation as Forvis. So BKD did merge and it was effective today. And so our new name, while your document does say BKD, we did issue that before June 1st. And so today is the first day that we can officially use our new name as Forvis. And so Mary McKinley is on the call with me today, and she is the partner on the engagement, and I have Joni Duckworth with me as well. And so Mary came back. She was on one of our breaks on sabbatical, and so she came back to whirlwind of a storm going on with everything with the merger. So we're really excited, excited to share the news with you all today. The team will be the same. So while we do have a new name as Forvis, we will be the same team here. And so again, I'm Jennifer Williams, director on the team, and then I'll let Mary just say a few words about herself as well.
Well, hello, I'm glad to be here with you this afternoon and to participate in your audit committee meeting. And oddly enough, many, many years ago, when I was with yet another firm, I was on the KCTCS audit team. So that's been a long time ago, but I am really excited about rejoining your team and being part of your audit process. Maybe just a quick word about Forvis. It's hard to remember when you first hear that word, but the way to remember it is that it encompasses two words that are very important to us as a firm, and that is forward vision. So FOR, forward vision, VISION. So we just shortened it to Forvis. We look forward to serving you. Same team, new name.
And then Joni's with us as well, so I'll just have Joni give a little bit of background about herself and her role on the team.
Yes, good afternoon. Excuse me. I'm Joni Duckworth. I'm an audit director here in the Louisville office, and I've been with BKD for about 14 years. Oh, sorry. That's going to take some time. Now Forvis for about 14 years. So working in higher education, not-for-profit, governmental sector.
Perfect. Thank you. Any questions before we go over the pre-audit communication for Mary and I about our team and being the new external auditors?
No question, this is Hannah, but please feel free to take control and go through your document if you prefer, instead of saying Hannah forward, Hannah forward.
Oh, okay. I don't. Is there a way? Do I just request control?
Yes.
Okay. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I see my cursor, but I don't see it doing anything. Okay. Well, Hannah, I'm not sure if I have correct control over it, so I'll let you control that, Hannah. Sorry. Okay. So this document here is just the pre-audit letter for you all as the audit committee. So this is just our required communication to the audit committee to talk about the upcoming external audit. So this first page just shows you the audit of the financial statements. So we will be conducting the external audit along with the other services in regards to the schedule of federal awards, the 990, as well as the Kentucky lease law report. So preliminary, we have identified these areas of items that we will look at. One being the risk of management override of controls. This is a very common risk and generally inherent in all financial statements, especially related to the estimates and the journal entries that are performed. So we will look at those items to look to see if there's any risk of management override of controls. The second item is improper revenue recognition. So another common one in the financial statements where we look at the revenue cutoff. So a tuition reasonableness test to look at that to make sure the revenue is recorded in the proper year. The third item is the valuation of alternative investments. Again, this is just estimates inherent there with the valuation. So we'll confirm those and we'll test the balances for the fair value that is associated with the investments. The next two are the allowance for doubtful accounts. Again, that's an estimate. So we look at that to see if there's any type of judgment and look to see that that's reasonable for the allowance for any type of receivables for accounts or pledges receivable. The last item is the uniform guidance. So the Student Financial Aid Cluster is material. That is a major program that we will be testing along with the HERF program. So that money that was received this past year for that. So we will have those that we will look at during the compliance part of the testing. So we have the financial statement testing as well as the uniform guidance testing. The timeline is noted there, and so we do know that the final reports are due to this date, October 7th. So we have that deadline that we have a time frame that we have set with management to make sure that time frame is met through the process. So our planning procedures have started. That is on track with our schedule. The next item is ongoing communication. So again, we report to the audit committee. We work with management, but again, as any questions or concerns come up, feel free to reach out to us because we want to have that ongoing communication during the process for the external audit process. The next page, the top, just gives us the contact information, and so we will connect with you as items would come up during the audit process. The next section is auditing and accounting matters. So just a couple of items that I wanted to point out here. The alternative treatments of GAAP. This year, KCTCS will be adopting GASB 87. So we will be looking at that with management to make sure that is properly adopted during the year. And then another item that we have is there's locations that are visited. So as management has requested, there will be 4 sites that we will visit. And so 2 of those have been conducted, and then the other 2 are scheduled for this week. So that's just noted at the bottom of that page. Then the next page just discusses the consideration of errors or fraud during our process for the external audit. That's something that is done in every external audit. And so this just gives you our audit approach to those considerations during the audit. So we have engagement brainstorming, where we work as a team to think through the process and what matters might be impacting your financial statements. We do have inquiries of management and others. So those interviews have been conducted or are in process. And then the next item is just the next page just discusses looking at those accounting estimates for bias that we already did discuss, and just if there's unusual transactions that we're inquiring on the rationale for those, and just any items with related parties. And that is basically the summary of this report. And so then we just have our contact information again to if anybody needs to contact us for the audit process. Any questions on those?
I just have one observation that I'd like to point out to folks. In the very beginning, you talked about the scope of the work that you're going to do. And you mentioned the IRS 990 form. And that's typically a form filed for nonprofits. And so one of the things that I want the committee to be aware of is it's been the practice of KCTCS to use the KCTCS external auditor to also provide audit services for the KCTCS Foundation. And so when you see IRS 990 and you think to yourself, why are we doing a 990? That would be why. So I had met with the foundation board myself, and Dr. Zarpata did, I guess maybe less than 2 weeks ago. And that group was also informed that Forvis, they were still called BKD at the time, would be coming in and conducting the audit for the KCTCS Foundation. So just so everyone's aware, I just wanted to point that out. And I thought I saw Dr. Zarapata's hand up for a minute. Do you have a question?
It was, but I answered my own question about the GASB 87 stuff with leases. So I think we're good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions from the group here regarding the process and the team that has come in to represent?
Chair Damaris, I see Hannah has a hand up, but I'm not sure if it's just leftover.
It was a leftover. Apologies.
Thank you. All right. Great. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. You're absolutely welcome to stay for the rest of the committee meeting. Would appreciate it if at least one of you could do that, just so you kind of get a flavor for some of the other topics that we go over. But I appreciate it, and we're looking forward to the engagement with Forvis.
Thank you so much, Chair.
The next item on the agenda is the KCTCS Audit Committee Charter. And so in our last meeting, which was in March, what I had reviewed with the group was what ended up to be a subsection of the overall charter. Part of the engagement that KCTCS contracted with Dean Dorton was to provide a deliverable by Dean Dorton of an internal audit charter. And so in March, that's what you saw. You saw the work product that was delivered by Mr. Lance Mann, and that has now been incorporated into an overall audit committee charter. Hannah, I'm going to have you scroll just a little bit and I'll hit some highlights. Each of you should have already received this document and hopefully within enough time for you to review it. The basic sections of the document include the committee's scope, its purpose, and its authority. And so the purpose of the committee is to assist the Board of Regents by providing oversight and guidance on the adequacy of KCTCS initiatives for risk management, values and ethics, internal control, and then, of course, internal and external audit, as well as any financial statements and public accountability. And so we provide a sort of an assistance to the professionals who are hired and contracted with KCTCS from an audit perspective, as well as, you know, any internal folks who are supporting that effort. The authority was granted this committee by the KCTCS Board of Regents bylaws, and those were adopted in September of 2021. The document has a link to those bylaws if you care to go back and take a look at those, the details of those bylaws. You scroll down a little bit more, we have a composition of the committee. Everybody who is on the current committee is here on the call. We have 3 members of the board who are appointed by the chair of the KCTCS board, and then 2 non-board members from statewide community who meet qualifications for membership. And so Jenna Skop and Jeff Holliday are with us in the non-board member representation. And for the external auditors, Jenna and Jeff, if you could just take a moment to introduce yourselves because they don't know you.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay, hi, I'm Jenna Skop. I have a background in performance auditing. I used to work for the state of Georgia and then for local governments in Kentucky. I currently work for Clark Schaefer Hackett in the Risk Management Services Group. We audit community banks throughout the region, and I live in Northern Kentucky.
Great. And Jeffrey?
Yes, my name's Jeffrey Holliday. I'm a certified public accountant in private practice. We've done governmental audits from school boards, health districts, cities, so we've got some background there. Worked for myself since 2001 and was partners with another firm from 94 through 2001. So
Great. And I understand you've taught at one of our local colleges. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for taking a minute to do that and introduce yourselves. Hannah, if we can get back to the document. Thank you. And so then there's some sections on committee meetings and overall committee responsibilities. And then you just heard a presentation by external audit. So one of the roles that this committee plays with external audit is, as was mentioned earlier, to provide any direction and support to the external auditors. The other role that we have is, as is our process, and I don't remember the correct interval right now, but anywhere from 3 to 5 years on a cyclical nature, the institution will issue an RFP for audit services. And so this committee will be part of that process. That used to be something that was sort of done internally under the finance and administration area, but we're going to have the committee take on a bigger role in that as we go through RFP for any of the auditors we're hiring, whether it's external or internal. At the current time, you know, external, you guys just signed on, so you've got a multi-year contract, and then internal as well has only been working with us for a year. So we won't need to be doing any proposal review for a little while yet. If we can scroll just a little bit further, the reporting responsibilities, you know, what this committee is responsible for in terms of who we report information to and how we do that. This committee, as a subcommittee of the Board of Regents, reports its information to the full board. And then there's just some other responsibilities that are sort of lumped in together as requesting board approval for any changes to the charter. This charter will be reviewed on an annual basis, and if the committee feels it needs modification, then that would have to be carried out through action of the committee and then on to the Board of Regents. The rest of this document is as you saw it back in March, and that is the detailed responsibilities from the internal audit team represented by Dean Dorton. So none of that language was changed. It was simply lifted and copied and pasted into this document. So with that overview, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or concerns before I make a motion to approve this document and move it on to the Board of Regents. I don't see any hands up, so that I take silence as agreement. Oh, we've got one. Jeff Holliday.
I guess the question would be it's on page 4 of 7. Is what's everybody's view on, I know it says July 1, the contracted with Dean Dorton. I mean, should that language be there? Because what happens if somewhere down the road, it's just like BKD is no longer BKD, or there is a change in auditors?
Yeah, so are you asking if that language should be in there, that we actually expressly name who is contract?
Yeah, if you need to expressly name or just say that, hey, that July 1, KCT is contracted with a professional service firm, something to that extent.
Right. We keep it a little bit more generic so we don't have to keep updating the document all the time. I'm going to ask for general counsel's opinion on that. I'm okay with that, but.
Right. I think that's an excellent idea, so that this document would be, as they say, evergreen, and we would be able to go with it regardless of the name of the accounting firm or which accounting firm might later get the contract.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Zarapata, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just, I know that the firm is named in there, but I also, when I was looking at this last night, Lance Mann's name is in there too. So I think we'd want to clean that up as well.
Exactly.
Thanks.
You mean I'm not hired for life? What?
Sorry, Lance.
Right. So we will take a look at that very first paragraph and make the language more generic so that the charter can be more evergreen, as General Counsel Duncan said. Great question. Are there any other questions? All right. Would the committee be okay with allowing myself and General Counsel Duncan to clean up that one paragraph, which is the beginning of the internal audit section, and with that change that has just been discussed, would you all be okay with me making the motion to make that change, to approve this charter with that change? And the change will be reflected prior to the charter going to the Board of Regents next week. Everybody seem okay with that? All right, then I'm going to make a motion that the KCTCS Audit Committee approve the Audit Committee Charter as written, with an update to paragraph 1 on page 4 of the internal audit section, which removes Dean Dorton Public Accounting and also Mr. Lance Mann's names explicitly and more generically states the relationship of an internal auditor with KCTCS. Can I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I'll call for, I think we have to do a roll call. Is that right? Let's have
Yes.
a roll call.
So our two advisory members, I will call on you first. If you have any comments you'd like to make on the motion, you may, and then I will go to the voting members. Mr. Jeff Holliday,
And no comments.
Ms. Jenna Scott.
No other comment.
All right, now for the voting members, Chair Damaris,
Yes.
Regent Cox,
Yes.
Regent Green.
Yes.
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Great, thank you. What will happen is General Counsel Duncan and I will work on this probably over the next day or two, and we'll get a revised copy out to all of you so you can see it. And then the revised copy will be posted by Hannah, who does all of our fantastic work with all the postings, into the Board of Regents materials for next week's meetings. So thank you all. I appreciate you taking the time to review the document. We now have a charter that guides our work, which is awesome. The next item on the agenda is actually an update from Mr. Lance Mann, and he's been providing these updates at each of the committee meetings. And the updates are timed with the risk management plan that was developed last year. And then Mr. Mann provides updates to this committee on a quarterly basis. And then those updates are carried to the Board of Regents. So Lance, I'll let you introduce yourself to those folks who don't know who you are and talk a little bit about where we are with the internal audit.
Thank you, Chair Damaris. So for those who don't know, my name is Lance Mann. I'm a director at Dean Dorton with a specialization in higher ed, along with about a 10-year background in doing outsourced internal audit for large organizations that need it, both in the higher ed space and in the healthcare space. And July of 2021, we were hired to take over the internal audit role for KCTCS and immediately started on a risk assessment. That risk assessment took place between end of July and end of August of 21, and we presented the risk assessment and internal audit plan for the year to the audit committee and board. And well, it's to the board in September of 21 before the audit committee was formed. And so we have been executing on that plan that was approved in September. If it's okay, I'll share my screen. Hannah, is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Right. Make sure I got the right document. All right, can you all see that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So this is the end of our plan, of our audit plan for fiscal 2022. We do have a couple of things from this plan that are going to carry over into fiscal 23 that I'll go over at the end. During this time period, we performed the audits you see here on your screen. We did some HERF expense testing. That's your Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, your CARES Act funds, to say it another way. We did a site visit and business office audit at Big Sandy Community and Technical College. And then we did a variety of information technology audits. If you remember, when we presented the original internal audit plan for the year, it was split between three different primary areas. One was general in nature, just sort of general type expenses. One was over student financial aid, and the third was a pretty intensive information technology audit plan. And we're emphasizing IT audit for KCTCS for the next couple, and we always will, but for the next couple of years, we're emphasizing it in a meaningful way because IT has not had sort of an audit function in place at KCTCS for a little while. The internal audit function hasn't done a lot in the IT space for based on our understanding for many years. In terms of a sort of an executive summary, here's an executive summary of where we saw issues. At Big Sandy, we've got 3 very low risk findings. In the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund expense testing, We did not have any findings or issues in that area. We'll go through a few strengths we found there. And in the IT space, we've got 2 moderate risk issues we'll go through here and 2 low risk issues that I'll go through with you. If anybody has any questions, please do ask those as we go through it. To start off on a very positive note, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, your team was very knowledgeable in this space, as I would expect that they would be. You've already been through an external audit in this space, and we did not note any compliance issues in this area, so that audit went very well. We tested 48 different expense transactions. All were appropriately used for the appropriate things. Your team's going to have fun going through this expense testing again with Forvis over the next couple of months, because it will be a major program in your single audit, and they're going to beat it up again. But from our perspective, you should move through that very easily, since you've been through an audit in that space several times. At Big Sandy Community and Technical College, we visited with them in person, did a tour of the campus. We interviewed the Chief Business Affairs Officer. We interviewed your interim president there and your Human Resources Officer there. We examined controls over cash, pro cards, property and equipment, and in general, just sort of processes and documentation at the college. The staff did seem to be very technically sound and organized and knowledgeable about their roles. You do have a manual of cash handling procedures at that location, along with every other location, and that one has recently undergone a revision. And the department requires new sign-offs for cash handlers and supervisors certifying receipt of the manual after each revision. You have a strong budgetary focus there. Your interim president is working very hard to balance your budget and spoke a lot about what he's working on there in terms of expense containment. And he does appear very motivated to learn and to grow that campus for you all. We had a few, what I'll say, are very low risk findings, but we will report to you whenever we see something where a policy is not necessarily being followed. The first one here is you've got a procedure over impressed funds that requires an annual surprise cash count of the cash drawer balance. And that particular procedure hasn't really been done since COVID-19 started. We don't think there's a high risk here. There's not a lot of cash sitting at that campus, but you do have a documented procedure that wasn't being followed. And so we recommended one, you've got the policy, you need to do it, but also, consider if that policy needs to be revised in any way in the future with the system office and senior management. And management has responded to that, and they do plan to have finished it yesterday. We will follow up with them in a future audit to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to. Again, in the cash handling guidelines, they have another policy written there that requires them to update the safe combination at certain intervals. 1, at least annually, and 2, whenever an employee is terminated. Again, they're not doing that in the appropriate time periods. And one of the safes they actually have, you can't really change the combination because it's an old safe that doesn't allow combination changes. Again, we think it's very low risk. 1, they do need to consider whether the policy is appropriate or not. But while the policy exists, we did say that they need to follow that policy. And they are going to look at the policy to determine if it should be changed. But in the meantime, they will start changing those and order a new safe for the Pikeville location so that they can comply with this policy. And then finally, a review of daily deposit tickets revealed where there were 2 deposits that were only initialed by 1 employee. Your policy there does require 2 individuals to participate in the daily deposit process and to sign saying that they did so. We only found 2 incidents in the time period we were looking at. So we do recommend that they maintain a log of future cash handling control incidents and make sure they're getting 2 sign-offs on each of the deposits. And so they are responding to that and making changes appropriate. Does anybody have any questions on that before I move into the information technology audits?
I just have one. When you said they have a relatively low amount of cash in the daily operations, what do you mean by low? Less than 100, less than 1,000?
Certainly less than 1,000. I think it's in the low hundreds. I'd have to go back and look at our documentation to get the exact number, but it's in the low hundreds.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. We did have a couple of other observations. These aren't necessarily findings, but things that we thought should be brought to the attention of the audit committee, many of which you may already be aware of, but in case you weren't, we'd be remiss to not state it. In interviewing the human resource team at Big Sandy, and I think part of it you already all are aware of, where there was an issue with overpayment to instructors at that college. Those funds have been recovered and that issue has been corrected, but subsequent to that, in looking through HR files, they found out that many of the employee HR records were missing certain important documents, like I-9s for some employees were missing from the personnel file. They're aware of it, which is why it's not a finding. They're working on fixing it. But again, we wanted to make sure that you all were aware of it, to make sure as the leaders are forcing them to really do what they say they're doing and continue to remedy that issue. And then the final one, which we've talked about in the past, you all have a policy around compensating balances, meaning you've got to transfer cash to the system office once it gets to a certain dollar amount. And we found in February and March, their bank balance at that location was over the $10,000 limit. They're already aware of the issue. They have corrected the issue, but it was over it. We've spoken to David Adkins since we did this audit, who's kind of in charge of treasury management. He's actually looking at adjusting the policy a little bit to allow for a certain number of days after recognizing that it's over $10,000 to transfer those funds to provide a little more flexibility. And we've given him sort of our thoughts around what that policy could look like. We obviously can't write the policy, but we've at least given him our opinion on that. And so there may be a change in that policy here soon to at least provide a little bit more leeway in the time period for those getting transferred.
And that's what I was going to ask, Lance. That's why I took my hand down. I just wanted to know what best practice was in that particular area.
There's no real best practice. For you all, this is more of a, you have more stringent controls at the system office, and so you want them to get there. What I communicated to David was, David wanted to have a very loose policy that said within a reasonable amount of time. And that makes it hard from my perspective, that makes it hard for a policy to be carried out because everybody's definition of reasonable is different. So I recommended something along the lines of within 7 business days or within a certain number of business days transferred over.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I can't see hands raised when I'm presenting for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's a setting.
It's a feature of Teams.
Okay.
And Lance, one more question. This is Lisa. The dollar amount of 10,000, because I remember we've talked about this at other colleges that were looked at. Given the sizes of these budgets and the money that's moved through the colleges on a regular basis, is that dollar amount appropriate or is it too low?
That would be based on the risk tolerance of senior leaders. From any risk management perspective, I would tell you that $10,000 is not in any way, shape, or form material to KCTCS and is probably low. With that said, KCTCS is subject to more than just financial risk. You're highly subject to public perception risk, and the loss of $10,000 from a public perception risk could be quite large. So you've got to balance both of those two items as you consider the amount. I would probably consider increasing it during times of high cash receipts. You know, for example, the policy could be in August and January. We allow you to go up to X number of dollars, but those should be transferred no later than the 15th of the following month, to allow for some increases in those amounts during those time periods where you're collecting a lot of cash.
Yeah,
Does that
I
make
think
sense?
I think that's an excellent suggestion because where there's, you know, cash, as I've learned in many different experiences I've had, cash never comes in at a perfectly steady rate on a monthly basis. There's always those peaks and valleys. And so just something for you to consider, Paul, as you're working with your VP of Finance, who's going to be coming in and looking at some of these things. The interim is who I'm referring to, and I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit later at the end of the meeting, Paul.
Sure.
Just something to look at, because to have a flat policy of a certain dollar amount all year long when there's ebbs and flows of money is a little bit hard to administer sometimes.
Yeah, and you could also set a policy that says, you know, this will be measured on the last day of each month, and funds should be transferred no later than the 15th of the following month to fall in line with the policy or something like that.
Thank you.
I will tell you that particular policy has been an annoyance for many on the finance teams and those at the individual colleges for many years. All right. So we did have several information technology audits. We have combined them sort of into one smaller report here for you all to consider. We looked at access controls, user awareness training, user awareness and the related training, disaster recovery planning, IT governance and risk assessment, and protective technologies. And so you can see here sort of the key testing steps that we performed here. A lot of it's just around, you know, what are your policies and are you following your policies and obtaining substantive documentation to show that, yes, you are following those policies. We did identify a number of strengths. You've got automated processes for new hires, transfers, and terminations, and those automated processes are working effectively. You are performing awareness training for all new hires, and responsible use training is being conducted on an annual basis with clear documentation around what happens if you don't complete the training and what happens if you don't perform well on the test. You do have a number of excellent cloud vendor partners that does mitigate some risks in the event of a disaster, and they would complement your disaster recovery plan. And you are currently conducting an annual risk assessment in compliance with GLBA, which is a good thing. That's a new rule that came into play about 2 years ago, where you're required to perform an IT risk assessment to comply with the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which for anybody who's done any banking work would be highly familiar with that law. And then finally, you do have in place proper mechanism modification of audit data, which would be your log retention and things like that. We do have 4 findings in this space. 2 of them are moderate risk. One of them is around disaster recovery plan. You're in the process of updating your disaster recovery plan to reflect some certain needed changes based on COVID-19. You have in the past heavily relied on your third-party partners, and so you're also amending it to put a little bit more of the responsibility and the burden on KCTCS staff. This is a long-term plan for the KCTCS team, so it is. You'll notice the anticipated completion date is January 31st, 23. That may seem like a long time, but you all are a very large organization, and they are trying to get input from all the colleges and all the things that the system office needs to have in place. And so we didn't think that timeline was too long based on what you currently have in place, but we do think they need to execute on this plan that they're working on. And I think we may even have somebody from IT on if they want to elaborate any more on their plans there.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Chris Howes, VP of Technology Solutions. And I would just echo what Lance has shared here. We do have a number of good procedures and processes in place around disaster recovery. But I think the work we really need to focus on is making sure that we pull together all those procedures and policies into one holistic, overarching disaster recovery plan that really includes not just our on-premise platforms and solutions, but also, as Lance mentioned, our third-party partnerships. We rely pretty heavily on Microsoft and Sierra Cedar for our PeopleSoft hosting. We just want to make sure that we have a plan, a DR plan that includes all of those vendors and partners, and something that we can refer back to and update on a regular basis.
And then once the plan's in place, I assume you'll work on some form of plan around testing that on a periodic basis.
Yes, absolutely. And we do testing today. It's just not as integrated as we would like it to be, but we do work with our third-party partners to perform testing today. But we'll make sure that as we go forward, the plan includes a more comprehensive testing of disaster recovery for all of our systems.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll stay on, so that way if you need to weigh in on the next three, you can do so, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks. So we've gone through sort of our recommendation there. In terms of the risk assessment, you are already doing a risk assessment that's compliant with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, as I mentioned. Our recommendation here is to take that risk assessment a step further to incorporate things that are relevant to FERPA from the U.S. Department of Education Privacy and Technical Assistance Center, which also incorporates incident response reporting requirements of Kentucky House Bill 5. And that would, in essence, the recommendation is to do sort of a NIST-based risk assessment, which is, so the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act focuses mostly on information security. And so the more comprehensive IT risk assessment would take into account more than just information security, but also around all of your IT systems. And you plan to do that this fall, I believe?
Yes, that is correct. And I think what we're going to be doing here is really focusing on trying to identify a NIST framework that we can, that can be sort of an overarching cybersecurity framework that encompasses all the things that you have listed here, Lance. And one of the frameworks that we've been looking at and considering is the NIST CSF framework that I think would address all the items that you have listed here as well.
It does. Yep. All right.
And if you could refresh my memory on House Bill 5, I think I dealt with it a few years ago, but my understanding is that the state has passed legislation that requires disclosure to anybody who might be affected by a breach, an information breach. Is that what you're referring to in the KYHB 5?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe there's varying levels of reporting requirements depending on how many are affected.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
And then the final recommendation we have is around log retention and storage. While we think you've got good processes in place, we weren't able to locate any written policies that inform best practices for log retention periods and storage requirements. And so the recommendation here is just to write down, sort of what you expect in these areas, so that way somebody has a policy to follow.
Are we bound by state law in any way on how long we have to retain certain things?
Yes.
And is that a well-distributed policy, email?
Yeah. So And I'm not sure what log retention incorporates, but we do have from the Kentucky Library, Department of Libraries and Archives, there are 2 retention series. One is for local governments and state government, and the other is for universities and colleges. And we have adopted the university and college retention series, and depending on what the document is, we retain it based on what that guidance says. So for instance, there might be something that is the U125. So that would be the University 125, and that would identify what document it is, and we follow that. Additionally, on certain other documents, we add a 7 to 15 year time frame in order to address any litigation.
Do we do any sort of spot audit to make sure that we are not retaining anything more than what we should? In other words, are we sweeping things that need to be swept to stay within the policy?
As far as I know, in the areas that I am concerned with, we do, but I could not talk about other areas. So I would hate to answer that question and do it inappropriately.
We do have an audit planned, and I'll go through this in a minute.
Okay.
We had it planned for this year. It's one of the ones that's deferred to 23 around human resources. And in that process, we do plan to look at document retention over required human resource related documents. However, we are also in the middle of our risk assessment. So if the committee would like to weigh in on any specific risks or potential audits for fiscal 23, I'm currently welcoming those as well.
Lance, I'm sorry. Lance, I just had a quick question. We have digitized a lot of our HR documentation. Does that change anything with retention policies?
Depends on what system you're using for digitizing it. And if the system you're using to digitally do it is automatically set up to destroy it at a particular time. But no, it does not matter whether you're storing it electronically or in paper.
Thank you.
Most of the good HR systems, HRIS systems, or document retention systems, if you do it right, you can set a date for destruction.
Thank you.
And Russ, I think one more thing on this is the log retention isn't a document. It's an electronic audit log that gets retained for a period of time, so that if there's a problem, you can go back and sort of review the code and the log to see, okay, who changed what and why was it changed?
Gotcha. I understand. My question really was more around one of the things that I've discovered here is that we spend a lot of money retaining a whole lot of data that is against our own policy to be retaining. You know what I mean? So I think you clearly define what the policy is for what we're going to retain, and then you clearly audit, are we in fact getting rid of the data and not paying for the storage that is not even in our policy? That was where I was really trying to get at. I was just amazed at the amount of things that don't follow the policy of being, out of your system.
Yep, and could be against the law if pertaining certain HR related files.
Exactly.
I'll add document retention to the risk assessment for consideration in the plan next year.
Lance, and this is Paul again. I swear this will be my last question. Where does that function typically reside? The document and data retention police.
So it would probably start in legal counsel's office, but she would have to delegate responsibility to the appropriate department chairs, whether it be in human resources or in the bursar's office or wherever. The policy should sit with legal, but she wouldn't be able to police that, so they would have deferred responsibility or delegated responsibility based on what the documents are.
Got it.
My
Thank
perspective. And legal counsel Duncan, I didn't mean to speak for you if you have a different opinion on that.
No, that's exactly what we do. And for those of you who are interested, just a little light reading, I did put the link to the university, the State Libraries, Archives and Records series, and it will, as you'll see, it will tell what we have to keep and when we do. And Lance is completely accurate in saying that we do rely on the various areas. So the registrar would have oversight for student records, HR for employment records, finance for finance records, but we are the records custodian.
Any other questions on that report? I have a few more things to go through, but those are our reportable findings for this audit period. All right. So in terms of one of the things we do is we go back and look at any findings that we've had in previous audits and where management has responded to us. And we go back and audit that they did what they said they were going to do. So if they were going to implement a new procedure, we obtain audit evidence to show that, yes, they are doing those new procedures. If there's a policy they need to implement, we go back and make sure that they implemented that policy, so forth and so on. If you noticed in each of the findings, they had a due date of when they committed to doing it by. And so we only follow up on those that were due during up until the date of our report. And so as you can see here, we've had 15 different action plans submitted by management through April 30th. 13 of those were due before today, and 13 of those have been completed. There are 2 that are not due yet. One of them relates to a change in your tuition and how you're reporting tuition on your website. I think that has to be approved by the board of directors in your June meeting. And one of them relates to technology, and I can pull that up if y'all are interested in it. But here's the one that's not due yet, related to transparency and the cost of attendance, and it relates to explicitly putting digital content costs on your website and approved list of charges. And the other one is related to IT network monitoring, malware detection, and you need to develop network and security alerts to analyze malicious trends, set up enterprise alerts, dashboards, and engage in annual training. And that's not due until the end of June. We will follow up on those during our next audit report. And then finally, in terms of a follow-up, and here's sort of a high-level overview of what we have done so far this year for you. As you can see here, all of these audits have been completed during this fiscal year. It was what I'll call a shortened audit period because we didn't actually get started on it until after the September meeting. We have 2 that were on the initial plan for the year that will likely get audited next year. One relates to human resources. We decided in coordination with Chair Damaris to defer that one until after a new human resource director at the system office is identified and hired and given a little bit of time to get her feet under him or her. The second one relates to conflicts of interest policies. We actually worked a little bit with Counsel Duncan this year, and really talking to her around what we would expect and what to look for. You all did adopt a new policy for the Board of Regents on March 25th. And there's consideration in adopting a conflict of interest policy for senior personnel that has not been done yet. And so, one, we thought it was too early to really do an audit over the new one for the Board of Regents. And two, we wanted to see if you all adopted one for senior personnel before executing on that audit. Does anybody have any questions on those two items? And then we are in the process of completing our risk assessment for fiscal 23. We have completed approximately three-fourths of our interviews for that. We've got more interviews scheduled throughout the month of June with plans of putting together a fiscal 23 internal audit plan in late June or early July, so we can start executing on that much sooner. That will come to the next audit committee meeting and to the next board meeting after your June meeting. Does anybody have any questions on those two things? We do have one audit that's already planned for fiscal 23 related to Maysville, and you've had some presidents change there. And so it's really an audit in response to the personnel changes in that on that college.
Well, thank you very much, Lance. That was an excellent report, and I appreciate you going through the detail and bringing some of our newer team members up to speed. I guess I have really just one more item that I'd like to cover before we close this
Regent
meeting.
Damaris, can I say one more thing? I'm so sorry to interrupt. There was one final thing I wanted to, in a way, mention to you all as the audit committee. It's a recommendation that's not written down. I'd recommended it to Wendell, and I don't know where that went after that, but since I've got you, I do have a recommendation around procurement cards for you all. It could be something the system office does. It could be something that we as your internal audit team does. But I am recommending a heightened continuous monitoring over procurement cards usage. There's a tool that other public universities in Kentucky are using. It's in essence a third-party service where they actually analyze 100% of your ProCard transactions each month and recommend a certain number of those back to management to investigate. And so I can work with somebody at the system office to give them more details, but I do think procurement cards could have some heightened monitoring by a third-party expert.
Yeah, Lance, if you could work with Buddy Combs on that, that would be great.
Okay. That's it. I'm done now.
All right, thank you. No problem. So I guess just to kind of get everyone else up to speed, I'm going to ask Dr. Zarapata to talk a little bit about some personnel changes that affect the financial side of the house. He's got a new individual who's going to be coming in, and so I'll ask you, Paul, to give the committee an update on what you're doing in that area.
Yes, so on June 13th, Miss Beverly Malloy will be joining us in the system office here as the interim vice president of administration. I want to thank Buddy for the work he's done. In the meantime, he's done just a fantastic job, and I know will help with this transition immensely. We're thinking that this will probably be a 6-month engagement for this person. And during that time, we'll be starting up the official search for the next, well, I never say permanent, but the next full-time vice president of administration. I will be sending out a bio and a headshot of Beverly soon. She's putting that together right now. I look very forward to working with her. She's, her references and just her candor and professionalism are really, really great.
Thank you, Dr. Zarapata. Appreciate that. So Obviously, she'll get her feet wet a bit here at KCTCS as she meets everybody on the ground at the system office and be in communication with all members of this committee. With her starting in the middle of June, I anticipate that we'll have another meeting. Probably, we tend to do them right before the board meetings, so probably in the late August timeframe, we'll do another reconvene of this committee, get some updates from all the folks who are attending today as appropriate, and then give her a chance to introduce herself and talk a little bit about what she's learned in the, I guess, probably month and a half she'll be on the job, or maybe 2.5 months, something like that. So that ought to be good. Are there any other questions from the group? I don't see any. It is 4:37 p.m. on June 1st. Again, I thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. Your input is so valuable. Your questions are always great and on point, and really, really do appreciate all the work that all of you do. So thank you so much. I would like to motion for adjourn. Can I catch a second on that?
I'm always second for adjourn.
Okay, got one from Russell. All you have to do is give me a thumbs up and say you're ready to go. Yes? All right, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.